Expenditure. This is a meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee for Capital Expenditures. Today is Thursday, September 9th, 2021. Thank you for joining us. As I mentioned in our previous conversations and our discussions last week, today we completed our formal presentation for most of the departments last week. So today we were just going to open it up for a little bit more open discussion about what we've been presented, as well as address some follow-up questions that we've been receiving, and any other departments or areas you think we would need to still cover that we could still address in the remaining meetings that we have. Just to start off, I did want to go back. And if you remember from the very beginning, and since we've had a number of members join us from previously along the way, I did want to go back and reference the policy and procedures and basically the role of the Citizen Advisory Committee again, just so we've got that. Let me pull that up real quick. See, coming up. Is it on screen? Can we see that? So basically, and this is a the policy and procedures for the capital plan. It talks about the Capital Committee, the Citizens Advisory Committee, specifically the Citizens Advisory Committee for Capital Expenditures, as established by ordinance, is charged with responsibility to review and assess capital needs and to advise the Capital Committee on the development and recommendation of the CIPs, that's the Capital Improvement Plan, and corresponding capital budgets, and to review the city's accomplishments with respect to the capital budgets approved in previous years. So, and then it talks about the membership. The membership is such that each member of the Board of E&A has the ability to appoint 4 members. Each member of the Board of Aldermen can appoint 2. And it goes on to explain capital fund policies and then some criteria for evaluating those projects that we've seen. And I'm not going to read all of this, but this is available and it's been distributed, so you should be familiar with that. And then it also defines what capital projects are. And I will go into that. Uses of funds shall be for capital improvement expenditures as defined by ordinance. As defined by ordinance, capital improvements means any action or expenditure taken or made to replace, install, refurbish, rehabilitate, reconstruct, construct, update, or otherwise improve the city's public infrastructure, including, for example, but not limited roads, bridges, parks, and other public places, sidewalks, arterial streets, alleys, municipal buildings, and efforts or expenditures taken or made to improve the quality of the city's fleet of rolling stock or other major equipment items, dumpsters, for example. So what you've heard so far in many of the presentations over the past number of weeks have been requests from various departments and assessments from the Board of Public Service or Engineering Department to sort of identify some of the priorities regarding capital needs throughout the city. Of course, any recommendations you all have in terms of priorities is an advisory capacity to the city's capital committee. And then ultimately the decisions are made by the elected officials when we get to the point of an appropriation process. So I just wanted to touch base on that. So having said that, and having gotten the presentations through the last final weeks, sort of like to open up into any questions. We have received some follow-up questions regarding some of the presentations by category. I know we've responded to them. I assume they're going to be distributed, and we can post those if necessary for those categories. I think we still have information systems and parks outstanding, and we just received those. But the other ones have already been submitted, so those should be available. So having said that, I would open it up if there are some follow-up questions regarding departments that you would you've heard some information from departments that like to have additional information, or you hadn't heard from some departments you're curious about and you'd like to hear them present something, or you had some issues and questions about process or timetable. So I'll open it up. Yeah, the policy is where online. Actually it's on, just so you know, and I again will pull this up. If you go to the city's website in the budget division, it'll say Capital Committee. Let me see if I can share. Let me pull this up and I'll walk you through it.
I just put a link to it in the chat.
Okay, very good, very good. All right, so I won't need to do that. So so that, yeah, that is all available, and any information that has been distributed so far through any of our previous meetings is also online. If you go to the budget division's website, you'll see an item that says Capital Committee, and then we'll have information for both the Capital Committee itself as well as the Citizens Advisory Committee, and any of the materials that we have previously reviewed. All of those are there. Yeah, that's a different. Well, it's a different. It'll get you to the same place, but yeah, that's a different. I'm citing a different place, but any of those documents that were presented before are available on the website, and you should be able to pull those up under the date of the meeting in which it occurred. So I'm going to put it out there. Are there any follow-up questions that we have the departments that would have presented that you would outstanding questions that you are curious about? Okay, the streets sheet. Let's pull that one up. Let's see here. It's a question from Street Sheet. 11 ADA transition states is a 20% city match. Share the screen. Let's go to that. The ADA transition. Okay. Actually, in this sheet in particular, the question was, it's a 20% city match. In this instance, it is not the match. That is the total cost of the project. There's not a match to go with it. The $2 million is basically to address ADA compliance issues so that we remain eligible for federal matching funds. So where you see the total estimated project value, it's $2 million. The estimated cost of the city match is that full amount of $2 million, which is why the critical amount of $2 million is listed there in its entirety.
Okay, Paul, do you see though in the notes it says city match of 20%? So that should be.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
That's
I see.
Yeah.
I get it. Yeah. I get it.
That was my ask.
No, that's fine. Yeah, that was obviously copied down from the ones up above it. But yeah, that's not the case in that particular item.
Okay.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Sure.
Paul, this is David Newberger. Do you mind if we use the microphone?
Sure, no, that's okay, as long as I can keep track of everyone there. Yeah.
Okay. I have a question about ADA compliance in the sense that this project with that specific money set aside will clearly be to eliminate barriers to access. But I worry that all of the budgets that are presented by all of the departments will, as they plan their budgets, they will include the costs that are associated with rehab work to put them into compliance. For example, in our last meeting, we saw that there were some restrooms in the Parks Department that are going to need to be refurbished. And I want to make sure that the budget includes money in order to refurbish those bathrooms completely in compliance with the ADA. And that's over and above this special fund that we're talking about.
That's a good point, David. Yeah, I'm not aware of that dollar, what the answer to that question is right now, but obviously we're going to pass it along to, I know that BPS would be involved with that, and any of the and any of the repair projects, particularly if you're a wholesale, let's say it's a
Yes, I did ask
comfort station.
the
in a
director
farm or
of,
something. Yeah,
I
go
did
ahead.
ask the director of streets that question for this, for the long arterial road work, and he indicated that that is within that budget. But there's lots of other plots out there that are going to have physical attributes.
Right, yeah, I think streets, as a matter of course, when they do their paving projects, they always do the curb cuts at the same time, and because it's more efficient that way to do it. But yeah, you're right, and when you're talking about comfort stations or things like that, you have to make sure that they fit within those ADA requirements, and that cost is built into the cost of the project. So that's something I will pass along to all of those who have submitted those costs.
Thank you.
This is Wally. I have probably two kind of levels of questions. One is on these projects that you've presented to us, I'd like to understand a little better the feedback process that you're proposing from here on out in terms of how we get the information back to you about our opinions on these projects. So just like to hear a little more about how you're imagining that process. And the second level of questions is about the fact that this committee has a mandate to do many other things besides just advise the advisory committee, which includes review past and suggest future capital investment strategies, which is a bigger background conversation, especially interesting given the upcoming influx of federal dollars through both ARPA and the infrastructure. So the infrastructure bill. So just wondering if the committee is interested in having that broader discussion or not.
I can actually address a couple of these things on the feedback process. Now, we did circulate an earlier input model to provide a form for input on that. It has been suggested that you would like a little bit more detail, be able to comment more in detail on some of the individual projects as well. So the idea would be that we would devise a survey of sorts to where that you could do that a little bit more specifically. What we'd like to be able to do is get something like that developed so that we can get it circulated to, of course, when you're dealing with a group such as this, and it's a large group, you want to be able to solicit information from everyone. Everyone gets an equal chance in their opinion, but then you also don't want to be overwhelmed. So we're trying to devise a method so that you can comment on individual projects, and we can sort of surmise by the number of comments that we get from the group where the sentiments are. And so that's going to be under development. I think we should probably have that by later this month, that we could circulate so that we can solicit the input from the committee. It's interesting, and on the committee mandate, and a couple of things. And Wally, this might tie into our earlier discussion way in the beginning about the equity component of capital expenditures and such, where we talked about past investments in capital and how we assess that. And I went into discussion earlier about some of this. There's some discussion in terms of being a broader picture of what we're looking at, because when you look at those things, it also involves economic development. It will involve a scope broader than what the capital committee typically deals with. If you remember from, if you remember from our discussion on my discussion on the original. Let me pull this up here. I'm going to pull up the budget guide. And if I can share that again. Pull this up. This is the budget guide for FY22. I wanted to show you sort of, because I've been thinking about this as well, and how do we incorporate more than this. I want to say typically the capital budget is somewhat restricted in terms of what the whole world of capital improvements looks like, because it's got a limited source. But there are other capital improvements that occur mostly in the economic development realm and such that, and I know SLDC is looking at this in a more holistic fashion. I think it's something that the capital committee can provide, at least BPS could provide past information on what expenditures have been, and forward those such that this holistic view can be had of capital improvements. Now, one of the things I think going forward in terms of how we proceed to address that is that I think that process is going to be over the next several months is what they're doing. And so that's going to take some time, which is okay, because as I stated earlier, I think there are going to be a number of appropriations of capital going forward. I think this first iteration probably is going to be something that appropriates both surplus funds from last year and a chunk of this first installment of ARPA. But you're going to have the second installment of ARPA, plus we're going to have hopefully some federal infrastructure funds coming down. Of course, we don't know what the restrictions are on that. So you're going to have a number of iterations of this. And as this review of past capital expenditures and where this is occurring and how we can best address areas that need the investment going forward, and how the best way is to leverage those funds. I think that's going to be something that gets developed, and that we'll have the opportunity, that you'll have the opportunity as a group to provide feedback on. Is that helpful, Wally?
It does. I didn't want to take up all the time. I thank you for that. I very much look forward to getting the opportunity to give feedback on that. It looks like Nate has his hand up.
Yeah, I saw that. Go ahead. Yeah, Nate.
Yeah, so to try and piggyback off of Wally's two avenues of questions, for the first avenue, is it the plan to somehow crowdsource the individual comments on the line items for the budget, so that what the work that this committee does is going to be publicly available, so that our comments will be able to be viewed by the public, so that they know what we were looking at and what we were considering?
Yeah, no, I think that's anything that's presented. Remember, you're going to be providing information, and this information can be collated and presented to the capital committee. All the capital committee's information is online, so that will be made available.
The second sort of avenue that he was talking about the broader advice in relation to our actual budget process and evaluation criteria seems like it's going to require, perhaps similar to the line items, someone with some technical knowledge coming in to talk to us about ways that the capital expenditure evaluation process might be altered to give us feedback into equity, or to give us feedback into other ways of looking at this budget process. And I'm wondering if it's possible for us to either discuss those opportunities or when that might occur.
Well, I would say that it's going to be a number of months before SLDC gets their review underway or completed, and to what those findings are, how will determine in part how capital, our piece, which is the city infrastructure piece, can be leveraged to assist any of those priorities that are identified from that process. In terms of the policies and procedures, you want to make sure that, I mean, there is a established set of ordinances that we're required to follow, and we'll be following them. So if there is an idea that, hey, perhaps that needs to be changed in some way, then that would be through the normal ordinance process. I think that was one of the questions that was submitted, and say, how do we change policy procedures? Or if you want to update that or something. For instance, I know you're interested in the equity portion of that. Should that be something that is written in the ordinance, say, hey, this needs to be consideration as well? I think that's something that obviously can be put on feedback, and then you go through the normal process of doing that. Short of that, obviously it's a priority to look at those type of things, and so but as we get more information, we'll be looking at that. And I think as we get that data, and it informs where we can have the best impact. Let's say there's opportunities for applying capital funds in a way such that if you do this area and you can, let's talk about affordable housing, for instance, you're providing funding for affordable housing, but the sidewalks around it are in terrible shape, and the streets around it are in terrible shape. You're saying, and look, this has been identified as an area that it's defeating the purpose of trying to promote housing if no one wants to live there, if the sidewalks are falling apart and the streets are falling apart. Well, that's the kind of thing that you would hope a closer study through the development arm would look at and identify and say, hey, look, there's some opportunities here to match these funds to get a bigger bang for the development, and by combining these infrastructure funds with these affordable housing funds, and you've got a better product, right? And you're trying to achieve a neighborhood improvement. So I think there's ways of doing that. It's going to be a lot of coordination, I think, and it's going to take a little bit more time. Go ahead.
So I understand what you're saying, and what you're describing, I think, is a very tactical way of approaching it. But I want to sort of clarify that it is the capital committee that selects and prioritizes the evaluation criteria in the CIP, correct?
Well, some of that criteria was set by ordinance. So I mean, so we can, as members of the capital committee, we can make those selections, say, okay, we're gonna do these things. And I think we're all pretty much cognizant of and sensitive to those areas, but we still have to abide by the ordinance in terms of, I know the major criteria was set by the ordinance.
I understand that. I'm reading from page 4 of the CIP, and it says in January 1994, the capital committee adopted additional selection criteria for capital projects.
Right.
I'm assuming that since 1994, no additional criteria have been adopted by the capital committee for the selection process.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any.
But if the capital committee wanted to go down that road and perhaps think about equity, think about youth, think about neighborhood development, it would be the capital committee that was making those suggestions that would then be adopted by ordinance.
I would say, as long as it's not contrary to those criteria that were established by ordinance, because most of the criteria were established by ordinance. I think that section you're reading, yeah, relates to federal mandates or something like that.
Right.
We're actually required to do something. But yeah, I think that could be true. Yes.
Thank you.
Sure. Michael, you had your hands up?
Yes. Hi, Paul. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Good. I had taken the time to put together a document that has some recommendations for discussion for the capital budget. Is that something that we could discuss here, or is that something that we won't have time to discuss with the other membership?
I'm not knowing what you have. I don't know, but I mean, if you want to go through some of your points, I do want to give everyone proper time to go through stuff. So, but go ahead and bring up.
I mean, I could wait till the end, or I could send out the document like in another format, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Yeah. Once you, and again, since I haven't seen it, I'm not quite sure how what it looks like. But if you would like to start, and we'll come back if we have additional hands.
Am I able to share screen?
Why don't you, if you've got, yeah, I would have liked to send stuff out previous.
A no is fine. That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if you can.
Okay, so I basically broke down into maybe 5 or 6 categories, some points of interest for discussion that revolve around the feedback that I've received from my ward, from alder persons elected, from department leaders that might not be at the top. So one of the main concerns is just ensuring that as the funds go out, that it's funds that we can see and feel in the neighborhoods themselves. So addressing like those quality of life issues, like the traffic maintenance, graffiti, litter. And under that category, I had 8 recommendations. One was funding for Operation Brightside that has corporate sponsors as well for the 3 vehicles that they need that weren't included in the capital budget. Funding for additional speed humps that alder people would like to see throughout the city. I had received some estimates on that. The purchasing of Adopt a Road signage by the Streets Department to allow nonprofits to help clean our major corridors and our business districts and to get recognition for doing so. Funding additional street sweepers so that we can start focusing on cleaning the major roadways at more frequency than we do the residential streets. So both the residential side streets that see very little traffic and the major corridors get the same amount of street sweeping. So that would be also a policy change. But if we had the capital equipment to support that, that would be good. Funding a 50-50 sidewalk match for LRA owned property. So as it is now, if the private owner doesn't have the match for the city funds, then that sidewalk never gets replaced. And so that disproportionately affects declining neighborhoods where there's less population or where owners are either absent or the city owns them. So a fund that was set aside to replace sidewalks in areas where they're needed, but the city doesn't have the money for them because they're owned by LRA. It kind of makes sense because if we're going in and doing the curb cuts for ADA accessibility, but the sidewalk ends halfway, down the block, does that make any sense to spend that money? And I see that happening across the city. And then litter bins. The city doesn't have any of them. We've requested them many times. They get hit on the street by vehicles in the business districts and neighborhoods, and then they can't be replaced. So having a fund for litter bins for the streets departments to respond to both the community improvement district requests and others. And that's one of the categories that I wanted to provide feedback for.
Okay, no, thank you, Michael. Actually, and I think the ability to respond to those things that we've heard, as well as offer other items such as those, are one of the things that we need to incorporate in that feedback form that we have. And I believe that's probably be a survey, and that would have any other items, and then you can go into that. I do want to second one of your comments on that, which I like, and I particularly with capital, is that, yeah, you want to see it. I mean, I always have that in mind whenever we talk about arterial street paving, because that's one of those things where I think everyone can agree, no matter where they live in the city, that the streets need paving. And that's one of those very visible, highly visible improvements that we can make. Let me,
if you want me to give any more feedback, let me know. And I will.
Yeah, okay. Let me see. I'm going to go to a couple of I'm going to go to the chats. And I'd like to get through those chats so I don't skip anyone here. Let's see, would like to still talk to the sheriff and have a real dialogue about his request, and it was short, insufficient responses. I could put out a feeler for the sheriff, see whether they can be available. But I can do that and ask them whether they would be available. I do know that they did respond with the written response, but I will reach out to them. All capital committee documents, there's the link to all the capital committee budget documents. Thank you to Matt. Total funding amount to currently be allocated, will that potentially change? Okay, that's a good question. Because even on the capital committee, there is not a fixed dollar amount that we're looking at right now. So let me sort of summarize what we have been looking at. So you've got the ARPA funds, and for everyone's benefit, the city was awarded $498 million, all right? And it's potentially 4 buckets of that, and I won't go into all the details of that. But a big portion of that, the largest, the most flexible of that, was the revenue loss component. So it doesn't affect the amount that you spend of the 498, but it doesn't affect how it's classified. And so there's a revenue loss calculation done for each of the next 4 years. The first one was FY20, the end of calendar of 20, which means converting our fiscal year to a calendar year basis and saying what that was. That loss was estimated about $150 million or so. And then each year it's going to be calculated based on an escalator going forward for that. So let's go back to the amount that was awarded. So we had $498 million awarded to the city of St. Louis. That's going to be received in 2 equal installments. The first installment, $249 million, we've already received. And so now of that amount, 17.3 million was allocated to the budget as a part of the bridging the budget gap. And then you had a net about 123 million allocated through this fiscal relief bill that was the subject of a lot of discussion this past summer, right? So, and again, that excludes about 12.4 million, and that was part of the rental assistance program. And there was a veto, and that also is net the veto amount that was part of that debate over funding. So the 249 million, there's approximately $109 million left, right? Now, we don't know exactly what the final disposition of that $33 million. Again, that's up to elected officials, what they want to do with it. So it doesn't mean that all that money is going to be spent on capital. But a good portion of it will be. So, so that's what's available today. And then you've got last year's surplus, of which half by ordinance goes to capital, and that was $16 million. Now, the benefit of that, and we had this discussion, we talked about streets and bridges, is because match money, you can't use ARPA funds for match money. So in order to get the biggest bang for the buck on those match funds, which is a 4-to-1 match, that's the kind of dollars you would like to use because they have no strings attached with the surplus money. So I would expect most surplus money to fill in that match category somewhere so that you can get those grant funds in. So that's what we currently have. But then you've also got next year's ARPA allocation.